is a grassroots nonprofit organization that advocates for policies in Islander Nevadans. Nevada is home to a growing APIA community, accounting for 1 in 10 voters. We are One APIA Nevada. Counsel Incorporated is Nevada's premier Democratic campaign firm, fighting for progressive issues and candidates for over a decade, and proud sponsor of Battleborn Progress.
This episode of Out in Front brought to you by
Counsel Inc., Nevada State Education Association, One APIA Nevada, Silver State Voices, and Stefan and Marta Schmidt, as well as our episode sponsors, Save Lives Nevada and Washoe Education Association.
Annette this week, and I am back from vacation, excited to join you again here on Out in Front. We have two amazing folks joining us tonight as our special guests. We are going to be talking about the Bundy Ranch. We are going to be talking about extremism. We know the January 6th hearings are happening right now. And we're going to be talking about the nexus of all of that as it relates to gun violence, because obviously in this country, we have a huge problem with that. And it's all connected. And all of it really did start here at the Bundy Ranch with anti-government extremism. So we've got two excellent speakers tonight. They're going to talk about this and more. So I want to introduce them first. We have Allison Anderman. She is the Senior Counsel and Director of Local Policy at Giffords Law Center. And then we have local hero. We all know him and love him. John L. Smith. He is author of Saints, Sinners, and Sovereign Citizens, which is a book all about what we're talking about tonight in the Bundys. And then he's also an independent journalist here. Y'all read him every Sunday, I'm sure. And he just wrote an excellent article about this very topic. So we'll be posting that in the chat later on. We'll also be posting his interview he did on KMPR this week as well. So lots to talk about tonight. We're super excited to get to this. So Allison, I want to come to you first. Introduce yourself. Tell the viewers a little bit about what you do at Giffords Law Center and the good work you're doing on gun violence prevention.
Thanks, Annette. So at Giffords Law Center to prevent gun violence, I work on local, state, and federal gun violence prevention legislation. I've done a lot of work in Nevada over the years and have really appreciated the opportunity to work with Battleground Progress and some of the gun safety champion legislators. But at Giffords Law Center, generally, we advocate for solutions to gun violence. At the legislative level, we defend strong gun laws in court, and we challenge bad gun laws that are putting the lives of our friends and family at risk. So, and we also support politicians and candidates who are gun safety champions.
Thank you for that, Allison. And John, you really need no introduction here in Nevada, but for the Nevadans who may not know who you are, the troublemaker that you are, like me, tell the viewers who you are and what you do.
Wow, thank you for that, I think. I've been around a long time, some would say too long. I've been a columnist a long time in Nevada. I'm a native Nevadan, and I once worked at the Review Journal for quite a while. I'm now freelancing. I work with most, in terms of Nevada's contacts, with the Nevada Independent website, which I'm proud to be part of, and many others, KNPR, of course, and some others, gaming websites, CDC Gaming Reports. I just have been, I guess, an old boot. I keep walking and trying to tell the stories of the state, and I'm thankful and proud to be part of this program.
Thank you, John. And we'll come back to you in just a little bit. Just for our viewers at home, we're going to go to Allison first. She has to jump off at 5:30 tonight. So if you have questions for Allison, we're going to start with her, and then we'll move to John in just a little bit. So Allison, I want to jump right in so we can get as many questions in as possible. Obviously, we have seen a rise in extremist groups over the last 10 years. I mean, they've always been there, right? But really a rise in the last 10 years. Obviously, here at Battle Born Progress, we are following these groups all the time. We've been following the Bundys since the very beginning. We work on gun violence prevention, but we also work on the protection of public lands, and those two things obviously intersect. We just put out a report this week on extremism and how really the roots of January 6th and all of the things that are happening at the federal level right now started with the Bundy insurrection, as we like to call it here. Do these groups use guns as a tool to intimidate and harass people? And what have you seen with other groups around the country as you all are tracking and monitoring these groups in these situations?
So first of all, I think I called you Battleground Progress, so sorry
we
about that.
We are a battleground, we'll take it, but we're also Battleborn on our flag.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, the use of guns in American political violence is nothing new, but it's definitely been more visible over the past few years. We have seen people bringing guns to white supremacist rallies like in Charlottesville, but also more recently to protest COVID mitigation measures. People brought guns to the state capitals after the 2020 election to protest the legitimacy of the election. And just there were indeed people with guns at the January 6th riots. I've heard some people say that the crowd was largely unarmed, and that may be true, but there were definitely people who had guns and were planning to use them. Yeah, we've seen people threatening election workers who were counting ballots, and even an armed mob showed up at the home of the Michigan Secretary of State, who is decorating her house for Christmas with her 4-year-old. In the last year, as we've gotten further away from the 2020 election, we've seen people with guns disrupt pride parades and threaten people who were attending an LGBTQ themed story time for kids. And, you know, these tactics are not limited to people using them in kind of mobs or groups, but there was a lawsuit in Colorado that alleged that armed individuals were going to homes in a predominantly Black neighborhood and asking people how they voted in 2020 and photographing their homes. So, using guns as a tool of intimidation and harassment is certainly increasing, and it's also happening at a time when gun violence is increasing. Rates of gun violence and gun homicides are going up, and this is in a country that already has an epidemic of gun violence. So just the combination of these factors, rising political violence, rising gun violence, are certainly intimidating people, even when guns aren't present. A woman in Virginia, I think, told a school board that she was going to bring every gun locked, loaded, and ready if her kids were required to continue wearing masks. So even though she didn't have a gun with her, the threat of gun violence is also being used as an intimidation tactic. The Oath Keepers, who Trump told to stand by during a debate, they said back in 2020 they were going to patrol the polls and draw their weapons if needed. So people are using guns, bringing them places, but they're also using just the threat of gun violence to intimidate and harass.
Absolutely. And for those of you watching at home, I see questions and comments coming in the chat. Keep them coming so we can get to them for Allison and John. We put a copy of our extremism report in the chat as well that we released this week with Center for American Progress. So take a look at that report. It has a lot of really important information, and it's an updated report from the one we originally put out with Center for American Progress in 2016. We wanted to do an update because with January 6th, with the, kind of extreme rhetoric we're seeing from a lot of the candidates, even here in Nevada, it's time that we put these out and start to call these folks what they are. So we have seen rising rates of political violence in this country. We see it every single day in the rhetoric online from, like you said, people actually showing up, bringing guns, intimidating poll workers, intimidating people in their own homes, including what we also saw on January 6th. Do weaker gun laws contribute to this rise in violence?
Absolutely. The laws in most states do not prohibit people from openly carrying guns or bringing openly or concealed guns into places that are essential to the exercise of First Amendment rights, like voting booths and protests and rallies, or government meetings and houses of worship. And the fact that states do not prohibit people from bringing guns into these spaces allows extremists to use them as a tool of political violence, essentially suppressing the engagement of people in constitutionally protected activities. And also, in this country, it's just far, far too easy for anyone who wants to commit political violence to get a gun and carry it out. More than half the states don't require background checks on private sales. Fortunately, Nevada does, thanks in large part to your efforts. And then also, most states still do not put any regulations on assault weapons or large capacity magazines. So people who want to cause harm can do so with, weapons that were really designed for war and killing large numbers of people very quickly. And this is all particularly concerning when it comes to young adults, especially young white men who are at particular risk of becoming radicalized. And most states do not put limits, do not set 21 as a minimum age to purchase firearms or even assault weapons. So people who, young men who are engaging in extremism online or joining hate groups and becoming radicalized can then go out and buy an assault weapon, large capacity magazine in, most states pretty easily, unless they have something in their background that would be a flag.
So last year, and this is something we deal with specifically here in Nevada, it's one of the laws that was enacted in 2015 when the Republicans took over the legislature. It is an NRA playbook to do this. They want this in states because then states and local states are the only ones who can enact gun laws, and local municipalities cannot enact gun laws when there are tragedies like 1 October. So that is called preemption, and it basically only allows the state of Nevada now to create gun laws or change gun laws. And we've had that, like I said, since 2015. But last year in Colorado, they overturned its state preemption law for guns. What have the results been of that? And what can states like Nevada learn from this? Because, like I said, we have our own preemption law here, and it's a newer thing. It was put in, Michael Roberson rammed it through the 2015 legislature, and we have desperately tried to overturn this because we can't respond to any type of tragedy that happens because we don't have a legislature every session. So talk to us about Colorado and what that has looked like.
Yeah, so we were very fortunate and proud to have worked with Colorado lawmakers to repeal its broad firearms preemption law, which, like in Colorado and Nevada and most of the states in the country, was the result of gun lobby behind the scenes efforts to take the right to legislate for public health and safety away from local communities, like they are not only enabled to on every other topic practically, but their state constitutions recognize that local communities are in the best position to make these hyper local decisions about safety. The tobacco lobby did a similar thing when it came to smoking laws. So, excuse me, in Colorado, we were successful in getting this law repealed. And then in the year that followed, myself and attorneys from Everytown for Gun Safety worked to draft local gun violence prevention laws that required waiting periods and raised the age to buy guns, banned open carry generally and concealed carry in sensitive areas like polling places, government buildings, playgrounds. And a number of localities in Colorado have now enacted some or all or many of these ordinances because they made decisions based on the safety needs of their communities. And, you know, some of these also include bans on assault weapons and large capacity magazines and ghost guns. So, you know, returning the freedom to make important public safety decisions to local communities is really top priority for us. And we're very hopeful that in Nevada, you know, Nevadans will continue to elect gun safety champions and people who want to advance these efforts, and that this will maybe happen in Nevada as well.
From your mouth to the goddess's ears, because it is one of the laws I hate the most. And we should have taken care of this in the 2019 legislature, and we didn't. And so now is the time for us to take care of that and other things. You know, we did finally do the ghost guns issue. Unfortunately, that's caught up in the courts right now, but hopefully we'll see some action on that soon and we'll be able to move that forward too. So lots to do here. We're excited about that. I see a couple questions and comments coming in the chat. Keep those coming. We'll get to those in just a few minutes for Allison, and then we'll move to John in just a few minutes. So how can we strengthen our gun laws to address political violence and extremism when the Supreme Court has recently issued a ruling that will make it more challenging to enact public carry laws? So what can we be doing, and how can we be fighting back against this?
So the Supreme Court said that public carry is protected under the Second Amendment, but the court also very specifically said that laws prohibiting guns in sensitive locations are still permissible and presumptively lawful. So what we need to continue to do is prohibit all guns in these areas where the exercise of First Amendment rights is particularly important, like at the polls, protests and demonstrations, where votes are being counted, you know, legislative hearings, government buildings, and houses of worship. So that's something that, despite the ruling, we can still do. The ruling did strike down this proper cause requirement in New York's concealed carry law, but Nevada did not have that proper cause requirement to begin with, so it was not affected directly by that decision. And also I want to mention that while the Supreme Court said that there is a right to carry in public, they didn't say what kind of carry. So a locality or just a state could still ban open carry entirely, like California has done and some other states. So that is also still permissible. And as we discussed earlier, you know, ensuring that people can't open carry is really important to preventing intimidation using guns and preventing even concealed carry in these sensitive locations, ensures people that when they're participating in these civic activities and democratic activities, that there isn't the threat that an angry person or someone who's radicalized is going to whip out a gun because they shouldn't have them at all.
Yeah, and you know, I think this last question that I have, I know there's a couple questions in the chat for you, Allison, but the last question I think is particularly important to folks here in Nevada because we had a mass shooting where the shooter, by the way, folks, I will never say a mass shooter's name. We don't do that here because we don't give them any notoriety. But the mass shooter had been stockpiling weapons, and he'd also been stockpiling ammunition. So for this last question, I think it's particularly important to us and to Nevadans. Are there additional laws or policies that can be enacted either at the state level or at the federal level to address these extremist groups, but also individuals who have been radicalized from having access to stockpiling weapons or ammunition?
Absolutely. So fortunately, Nevada already has some of the laws that I think are really important to preventing someone who's radicalized from getting their hands on guns, like background check laws and extremist protection orders. We also need strong hate crime laws that prevent people who've been convicted of certain hate crimes from possessing guns, because we know that there is a correlation between committing a hate crime and radicalization. But to your question specifically about laws that would prohibit someone from stockpiling guns, the state could enact a 1 gun a month law or a 1 handgun a month law, which would limit someone to only buying 1 gun a month at a time, and also regulate the sale of ammunition, ensure that anyone buying ammunition is subject to a background check. These are some things that could help. And also ensuring that gun dealers are subject to much stronger state laws and state regulations. We know that these types of laws can ensure that gun dealers who are behaving unlawfully and trafficking firearms to people who commit crimes, and dealers who are not following state and federal laws get shut down, and prevent the flow of guns into the illegal marketplace. Those are kind of some of the main things that I would suggest.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, especially after the Buffalo shooting, I think a hate crimes piece of legislation would be critical, right? Because we know what was motivating that mass shooter to go into that grocery store and kill all of those elderly folks. And, you know, we see it time and time again that this extremism is kind of running rampant and is the common vein through all of these things. And so I think any of those things would be welcomed at this point. So I want to move to some questions in the chat for you, Allison, and then John, we're going to come to you. I think this is a really important question. It's not specific to guns, but it's specific to the theme overall of extremism, because we're seeing this more and more with QAnon, with disinformation, with all of the radicalization that's going on, not just in the political atmosphere, but just generally in this country. So how can we fight extremism in our own families when ridiculous fake news pops up in the conversation? And Allison, I'd just like to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I want to start out by saying that this is not my level of expertise. I can answer from the point of view of being a human and a American, but I don't have particular expertise into how to help your family members de-radicalize. But I do think, you know, from some of my own experiences, people who fall victim to extremist ideology tend to be isolated. So I think engaging your family members and your friends and making sure they're getting out and interacting with other people and not spending all day in front of a computer reading conspiracy theories online is really important. I think ensuring that people get mental health treatment if there are mental health issues, to keep them from being susceptible to some of these types of extreme groups. And I think, you know, I mean, I don't know whether it's the right suggestion to talk to people about their views or your views. My guess is that that's probably really difficult and not necessarily likely to change anyone's mind. But maybe just try to find common ground. We all want gun violence to stop. We all want people to live healthier, safer lives in our communities. And any way that you can find that common ground, I think, is probably helpful.
I think that's right. So this one is from Will. He asks, what is the legal basis behind reciprocity CCW laws? And what do we make of this in light of the states trying to protect or regulate people traveling for abortion?
Well, I'll answer the reciprocity question. I mean, states are free to recognize permits from out of state. States often, are actually required to give full faith and credit to the laws of other states. Certainly, they do not have to give reciprocity to other states' concealed carry permits, but many do because they have been encouraged by the gun lobby to do so, because the gun lobbies and the gun extremists state's ultimate aim is to have everybody carrying guns everywhere at all times. So they want a person in X state where it's much easier to get a permit to carry to be able to take their gun to Y state where it's more difficult. And in terms of the laws restricting travel for abortion, I'm sorry, can you read that question again, Annette?
Yeah, it just says, what is the legal basis behind reciprocity CCW laws? And what do we make of this in light of states trying to protect or regulate people traveling for abortion? So basically, how does that apply now to abortion? If you can bring your gun anywhere, how does that apply?
Yeah, there doesn't have to be consistency in laws across different areas. I'm obviously of the mindset that laws restricting abortion are not just unconstitutional, but that abortion is a human right. And so that states that are limiting or restricting it for women are committing human rights violations. But there's nothing legally that requires them to apply the same set of standards that they do for gun laws that they do to abortion laws. It's obviously hypocrisy. We all know that. They don't really care because what really matters is whether or not they have the votes to get the policies through that they want. They don't care about being consistent or not being hypocritical. They want to expand guns and restrict abortion, and that's what they're going to do, regardless if it seems hypocritical or inconsistent.
Couldn't agree more. All right, this last question I think is uniquely for you, and I want to get to it. It's from Terry, and Terry has spent a lot of time. She was one of the people who helped us get Gold Butte designated and literally sat across from Clive and Bundy when the whole thing went down. She's amazing. She asked, our country needs to develop a plan on how to deal with domestic terrorists. What could a plan like that look like?
Unfortunately, that really is outside of my area of expertise. I don't know what a comprehensive plan to address domestic terrorism looks like. That's really a question for people who work on and study extremism. My expertise is really more regarding gun law, gun violence, and gun policy generally. And I think that I've spoken to the gun laws that I think can prevent people who are radicalized from obtaining weapons that can be used to kill people and to keep guns out of their hands, and to make sure, we're talking about this kind of gun violence in the context of political violence and extremism, but a lot of gun violence is not as organized and planned as the type that we're talking about. A lot of hate crimes really happen by individuals who are operating on their own. So just ensuring that those people can't bring their guns to a place where they might have an impulse to attack someone or to commit a hate crime, I think is really important from this perspective.
All right, Allison. Well, I want to thank you for joining us tonight. I know you have to run, but thank you for sharing your evening with us and being here late because you're on the East Coast. So thank you for that. And we will talk to you soon. Thanks for all the good work you do on gun violence prevention. We appreciate you, and we appreciate Giffords Law Center.
Right back at you. Thank you for having me, and enjoy the rest of the conversation.
Thank you. John, I want to bring you in. We have talked a lot about this. You've done a lot of press about this very topic this week. So, same thing for you. We've dealt with the Bundys here for so long, and we've seen, I always say we saw the extremism coming before I think the rest of the country did, because we had the violent insurrection right here in Mesquite. They pointed guns at federal agents. And then two of their supporters walked into a CC's Pizza and literally executed two police officers and walked into a Walmart and committed a mass shooting at the same time. What do you make of all this, especially in light of January 6th and all of the other things going on?
Well, first of all, you have to, I think, be sensitive to some of the issues that the Bundys bring to the story in general, right? You have this long time interaction between the federal government and locals in Nevada. Nevada history is replete with issues where the federal government has not held up its end of the bargain. Ask anyone from the indigenous community if that's true. But it's also true, throughout our history. So there are elements to the argument about water rights, about cattle grazing, that are questions that we can put them on the table and talk about them. However, after the court has ruled, after 20 years of fighting, if you come out on the short end of the stick and the rule of law has applied, then comes the cattle roundup, and with your, essentially a relatively small fine in Bundy's case that ballooned into more than $1 million because he refused to pay it. And with the add-on fees and everything else, if we've ever been to DMV and failed to pay a fee, you realize those things accrue. And so there you go. But that's one element of this story. And what you're hitting on, Annette, is what made it different this time, right? Cliven's been arguing about this since the 90s. We can go back to Wayne Hage and Ben Colvin and all these other ranchers who made their statements and who had their conservative values and beliefs and their religion and all of that. And what made Cliven different? I think in part, the manipulation by social media, the ability to bring that voice that was essentially a one-off or in the local press to a kind of national audience. And all of a sudden, people who love to manipulate people like the Bundys, they love to manipulate the true believers, they started to manipulate them. Who comes on the scene, of course? Alex Jones and InfoWars, the Sean Hannitys of the world, and all these other characters who really make a fortune off of this side of the political spectrum. They see the value of the man with the white hat and the cattle, and he's an old Mormon rancher, and all of these images that are part of this story. And I think they took advantage of it. That doesn't excuse him from behavior and from also understanding that while they might have been manipulating him, I kind of think he was trying to manipulate them. And so you've got this game being played, and it almost turned to calamity. Almost in April of 2014, it was a powder keg with fuses lit.
So let's then fast forward a little. We know the outcome, and he was pissed off also that President Obama designated the area as a national monument. That's actually where we came in, because we were fighting for the national monument because, it was a sacred area a sacred area to the indigenous community here, and we wanted it protected for future generations. Mm-hmm. So we move forward from that, and his sons and some of the other followers, including Michelle Fiore, who's running for office now, sure, go up to Malheur, the preserve in Oregon, and they take over a federal building. Now, if it were a person of color who did that, those people would have been taken out immediately. But nevertheless, they go up there, they take over a preserve, and they make another stand against the federal government. And this kind of escalates the whole situation. And again, I think the extremism kind of balloons, as you said, and the narrative takes off again. Talk to us about that, because I'm leading up to January 6th with this. Sure.
Now the Malheur Wildlife Refuge takeover is important in this story because in the run-up to that, after Bundy Ranch standoff, you have other actions that include the Sugar Pine Mine incident, where actors heavily armed came to protect, we'll put that in quotes, folks who were squatting on mining property on federal land. They hadn't paid their assessments, and they had challenges, and they got protection from these guys who showed up from the militias. And so you go to Malheur in 2016. Now that year is important because in January, when they show up in the freezing winter of that Eastern Oregon area, I mean, if you go there in the spring and summer, it's a remarkably beautiful place with flights of birds on the skyway or the flyway. It's an absolutely wonderful place to see. But in the winter, it's very cold. They were there for a reason, in my opinion. And one of the reasons was that just a few months later, the indictments were coming down with the Bundy's names on them. Now, this was another move to forward that argument that the federal government has overreached. And Malheur, which is essentially in that time of year empty, you've got them taking over this thing. And of course, the press bites on that. And who shows up but their friends in the militia? And with the armed presence and folks who aren't used to the rural West, the Eastern audiences start watching and they say, wow, these guys are really in a kind of insurrection. And in fact, what you have is a building storm. And we're not in 2014, we're in 2016. And it goes from there after the indictment.
Absolutely. Now let's get to January 6th, because I believe, and we've heard from the recent hearings, one of which is happening tonight, that this does in fact all tie together. And we knew it in 2016 when we produced our first report on this. And we knew that there were signs and feelings that this could escalate past Nevada, past the West, and could really be amplified nationwide. And it has now. So last week, one of the January 6th hearing, we saw a former Oath Keeper say that he had hoped the storming of the Capitol would start a, quote, new civil war. He also referenced the Bundy Ranch standoff that happened in Nevada in 2014. Based on your research about the far right, how far back does this desire for another civil war go? And what are their goals? And what do you feel is the connection back to this whole Bundy Ranch and Malheur situation?
Sure. No, first of all, the hearing was fascinating for me because Jason Van Tettenhove, who went there, as he described it, as an independent journalist. This is a guy he was a journalist and a writer, but also an artist and a tattoo artist, really. And so he went there, I think, searching for some answers and answering the call from some social media, showed up and, fell in with the Stewart Rhodes Oath Keepers group. Stewart Rhodes, who went to UNLV and had time in Southern Nevada before he went on to describe himself as a kind of, he wouldn't call it a militia, but others do now. So the Oath Keepers group was there on the scene. They didn't get along with other militia members from the 3%ers of the West. They tend to be more military oriented. But at any rate, he fell in with that group and wound up becoming a spokesperson and kind of propagandist for them. What he described to the committee was this group led by this big ego Stewart Rhodes, who we know now as the guy with the eye patch, and he kind of is a Bantam Rooster general on the scene, what he used to call a beer can commando years ago, because he was full of his confidence, not so much in terms of knowing where he's going, but there you have this transition from a guy who's kind of a yahoo, who suddenly starts to get gravity because he's valuable to people who want to manipulate that vision of America as a place on the edge, as a place that needs these patriots, these armed, heavily armed, in some cases, military folks. The Oath Keepers were there. Many of them left Bundy Ranch before the standoff, actually, but some of them were there, and certainly they play a major role in January 6th. By then, they're very confident and they're marching in their stack formation, as everyone calls it, which is a very basic military move, but they did it. And so there's your transition to January 6th. However, in Jason Tettenhove's defense, he left that group in 2016 because he saw, and this is important, he saw it changing. He'd start changing from these guys who said, we're patriots and we're standing up for the little guy, Cliven, the little guys at the sugar pine mine, or 2016 at Malheur, these ranchers and these iconoclasts, they changed. They started talking about white supremacy. They started talking about race issues. They started talking about, even at the end for Jason, when he left, they started talking about how the Holocaust hadn't happened. And so you've got people who are going off this extreme end where they go from being armed and, marginally, a little bit alarming to being really, frankly, willing to take over the U.S. Capitol.
My staff now are changing their titles to Beer Can Commando, by the way. So I just want you to know you're a fan favorite already.
Well, there you go.
So what significance, in your opinion, especially having done all this research on these folks, and you've written a book, we put the link in the chat for those who are watching at home. If y'all want to get the book, I would highly recommend it. What significance does the Bundy standoff carry in hindsight, given all that has happened since then with the rise of the MAGA movement, QAnon, and other extremist groups? Like I said earlier with Allison, these extremist groups have always existed, from the KKK to other groups, but I feel like they've kind of, what you just said, morphed into other things now, and now they're taking on a whole set of different issues and really becoming problematic.
Yeah, I think it's really a question, and it's part of when people historians study the Trump administration, they see these things. What mainstreamed extremism? Was it a one-off thing? Was it, or did it happen gradually? And I think when you see the Bundy standoff, you see people, and this is why I'm slow to vilify Cliven Bundy and his family, but I am quick to point out that the people who would manipulate that situation, the puppeteers, the people like Roger Stone, who attended Bundy rally, the people like Alex Jones, who promoted those things, like Glenn Beck, like Sean Hannity for a time, like so many others. The guy on the scene right afterward is the hard right lawyer, Larry Klayman. And so why were they there? They were there because they could use it. And they used it to their advantage, and that was to promote the vision of America that picks on the little guy, the white guy can't catch a break, and look, the federal government is crushing this guy. Forget that he hadn't paid his fees in 20 years. So you have that. I think the Bundy Ranch standoff set a stage. It provided a stage, a proving ground for people who wanted more and wanted to sell that vision of America as a place that needed guys heavily armed at the governor's mansion, outside this one and that one, federal buildings, that kind of stuff. They helped mainstream it. And, that's the shame of them, in my opinion. But it also is, I think, where that standoff really is historically.
John, I've worked on these issues a long time. You know that. I've worked on abortion. I've worked on gun violence prevention. I've worked on a lot of what some call controversial issues. When I worked on the Bundy Ranch, and I worked on specifically talking about Cliven not paying his fees and his taxes, and him, in my opinion, being the ultimate welfare queen, because he actually was, subsidizing. He was being subsidized. I just feel I've never had threats like that come into our office, come into my home, like I did when we were working against Cliven Bundy, trying to get Gold Butte designated. I feel like this is, it wasn't as prevalent then as it is now, but the threats and the violence that are associated with these movements, especially for women and people of color who work on these issues now, it's kind of taken it to the next level. Are you seeing that in your research, that, especially these white men who are part of these movements feel emboldened to go out there and intimidate people using guns, using weapons, and threatening people with their lives?
Yeah, there's no question that is much easier to do. And I wanted to whisper off camera, "Welcome to my world." that happens. The threats do happen. All of that, and it is unnerving at a level. However, what I see at this is it's easier because sniping on social media is so much easier. It's so much easier to troll people, to be a big shot from behind the screen and not have to own up to what you're saying. All of that stuff. People. And we've created that. I mean, through this technology, it can be used for great things, but it can also be something that people do when they want to harm someone or get them off their game and defeat their arguments. So that is definitely part of it. I don't know that that's going to change. I don't foresee a day when we're going to be sitting together and reasoning on some of these basic issues because in the case of the Second Amendment, for instance, I believe in it. I believe in all the amendments. However, to be able to kind of literally and metaphorically weaponize it through marketing and through other things is something it's obviously not healthy for the country. Just look at the rate of homicide. But you have that we deal with, and this is, really why your group exists, frankly.
Absolutely. And I'm a gun owner myself. We own a gun, but I also believe in better gun laws because I think it's common sense, but what do I know? I guess I'm just, some white woman who screams about things. So my next question for you, John, is how do far-right extremists thread the needle of being violently anti-government? I mean, again, pointing guns at federal agents, killing 2 officers in a CC's Pizza, bashing officers over the head at January 6th with a fire extinguisher, but also purport to love police and law enforcement. I guess I just don't understand the contradiction there. And this is something we've talked about a lot because Adam Laxalt, purports he loves the police and he's pro-police, yet he hired a woman who literally helped plan the January 6th insurrection. So how do you love the police, but also support an insurrection that killed police officers?
No, I mean, I think you're hitting something that's really potentially very powerful. And that is that you're raising the issue also of just who makes up police departments. So if folks support the police, does that mean that police support the armed protesters? And the question in the case of the Bundy standoff was that there are many photographs that exist of law enforcement officers very close to those guys including people on the bridge who are pointing guns at BLM officers and Park Service officers. You've got them very close. Now, to me, I'm not so sure others would get away with that, but that's what happened that day. So I think you're hitting on something really important. There are a lot of questions to ask. One is, what does menacing mean to people? If a person brings arms onto the street, should they not be held to a higher level of comportment if they start marching and menacing especially without permit? And doesn't that attract law enforcement? We know what often attracts law enforcement are people with no arms. So there's a lot to that. You've opened a kind of Pandora's box of that, and it all points back to a few things. And in my experience, and that is that our country comes down to gun ownership is a right. However, you ought not be able to carry those guns to intimidate other people. And we see that more and more under the guise, this umbrella of the Second Amendment, which to me is so abused. When people start showing up, it works quite often. It intimidates. It certainly intimidated at the Bundy Ranch standoff. That's a really great example of this. Those people showed up for a reason. 2 years earlier, before the Bundy Ranch, the courts ordered that the cattle would be impounded because of a lack of payment of grazing fees. And Cliven called his friends in the ranching community in that region, and they showed up, some of them armed. And that was enough to stop the cattle impoundment. 2 years later, the government got a lot beefier. And in my own experience, by going through, running the kind of, a gauntlet of characters there, including federal officers, it was intimidating. They were intimidating also, but they were there intimidating to carry out a court order. Whereas the folks who showed up from Idaho and Montana and elsewhere, they were there to pretty much to intimidate those trying to carry out the court order. So it's really about rule of law. And sometimes you lose in court. And if you lose and you've exhausted your appeals, then, that's the game. Unless you decide that you're going to change the game and change the rules.
So staying on kind of that theme of elected officials emboldening this now, or people running for office emboldening this behavior now, do you see an increase in elected officials or people running for office embracing these far-right extremist movements compared to 10 to 20 years ago, do you see it slowing down or increasing further as we go forward, especially as elections become, Joey Gilbert's out there contesting an election he doesn't need to contest. All of this nonsense kind of rhetoric exists out there. How do you see this going forward?
Yeah, there's no question that Nevada, frankly, as ever in my lifetime as a journalist, as ever is a petri dish for politics. And that includes this extremist politics that we're experiencing now. Nevada's GOP rolls were larded with people who not only believe Trump's big lie, one, but two, are even at some level participants in things like the Proud Boys. There were several candidates not successful who were folks who identified with the Proud Boys movement, with that Western chauvinism and the violence that goes with it. You also have people who are as close to QAnon followers in terms of, I'll say the name, Jim Marchant. They're as close to QAnon people as you could get to without a T-shirt and the ID card. You have that, and those are things that despite really politics aside, if you believe in a better Nevada, folks who are against the truth of a free and fair election. When a woman like Barbara Sagaski, I've known Barbara for years, she is as square and as conservative as anyone can be. And they brutalized her because all she did was tell the truth. And that's a reminder, not just for Democrats, but that's a reminder for Republicans.
Yeah, I mean, when you see a group like mine going out there and praising Barbara Sagaski, the former chair of ALEC, who has I've always gotten along with her when I worked for Congresswoman Titus. I've always had a great relationship with Secretary Sagaski. I don't always agree with her on issues, but she's always been an upstanding politician. And as Secretary of State, she's always told the truth. And so for me, it was really troubling to see them go after her when all she was doing was upholding the law and doing her job that she was elected to do.
Yeah, no question about that. And I think when we look back in years to come, that is a real turning point moment for Nevada for not falling down the rabbit hole. I'm not saying it can't happen; it certainly can. But that was a tremendous turning point. She rebuffed people who, you talk about Laxalt forwarding the big lie and lawsuits and being kind of a handmaiden for all of that, and Michael McDonald, the chairman of that party, and several others who really should have known better. But Sagaski stood strong, and I think when people write the history of this time, they're gonna write about her favorably.
I certainly hope so, because she deserves it. And especially standing up against Trump, because Trump made those phone calls to her and was leading on her heavily like he did other elected officials. And now with all the January 6th stuff coming out, you see exactly the intimidation and manipulation tactics they were using to try and overturn a legal, fair election. And they're going to try it again in 2022, and they're going to try it again in 2024, in my opinion.
Well, and I think that's a reminder for people, and to continue that thought, the handmaidens who signed off on the false elector shtick, all of that, all of those people who were so willing to essentially just lie because it might work, and when you see that, it's a reminder for people, and it's really a reminder for people. Call me old-fashioned. Not just of the Democrats, but also of those Republicans who remember a time when they didn't play this way. They didn't play like that. They had their hardcore politics. It's not beanbags. It is football with no helmet for some. But they didn't play it like that. And I think some folks, I know from interviewing them, some folks are really embarrassed about it. But what are they going to do? They're not in charge anymore. Those folks, people who are kind of canaries circling their head, they're in charge of the party right now.
Yeah, I was actually talking to Assemblywoman Carlson yesterday about this very notion,
Right.
Because she served when I was working for then Senator Dina Titus, and that was when Bill Raggio was there and Randolph Townsend was there, and yes, they were Republicans, and even Barbara Sagafsky was in there, Ann O'Connell was in there, right? And they were Republicans, but you knew where they stood on issues, but they wouldn't do this. I think somebody like Bill Raggio and old school Nevadan Republicans would never sign, even Paul Laxalt, I don't think would ever sign off on something like this.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think and that's, you talk about rebuilding. Both sides need to get out the hammers and nails, but that party they have to create a new foundation because they don't have it now. I mean, they've absolutely sold it out, frankly, to a kind of a charlatan in the last election.
My husband says, because he was a Republican at the time, he worked for Dennis Nolan, the Republican Party left him. He did not leave the Republican Party. And I think a lot of Republicans feel that way, who, maybe are fiscally conservative, but more socially liberal, especially here in Nevada, because we all have that kind of weird libertarian spirit that runs through us. It just doesn't uphold our values as Nevadans anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's crooked poker. I mean, you cheat at poker and get caught. You get kicked out of the game or worse. But they cheated at poker, got caught, and they keep a straight face, and it just doesn't make sense.
Absolutely. So my last question, then we'll get to some audience questions. What do you hope the result of these January 6th hearings will be? And do you think the DOJ should get more involved in the January 6th hearings?
Well, really what I hope for these hearings, and I don't know, it's probably a hope beyond hope, and that is that people will watch it. I've watched it. I've got it recording now, but for me, they've gone out of their way, despite a lot of problems. They've gone out of their way to have Republicans and Trump insiders tell the story. That is a remarkable strategy, but beyond that, it's one that's meant to bring people into the story, not to alienate. And I think that's brilliant. It's inspired. And so you have that. And I would hope that people would at some point just watch and listen to people who were the true believers, who were loyal to the administration, and to see that. And to understand that it's okay, that people, good people, smart people were fooled, at some level, and they went overboard, and they're pulling it back now, and they see differently now. And it's not just those evil old Democrats, who thought Trump was a bad guy. They got to see up close that he was a bad guy. And so that would be my hope. The DOJ should be involved. They're going to have challenges. But some of those people, some of the folks are I believe are going to pay prices that they didn't expect to be paying in the next few months. Well,
let's hope. From your mouth to the goddess's ears, I hope that happens, because, I'd love to see Michael McDonald go to jail. Nothing would give me more pleasure. So I want to get to some questions from our audience, John, really quickly, and thank you for hanging with us. Sure. I'm going to start with the same question I asked Allison at the beginning. Shelby asked, how can we fight extremism in our own families when ridiculous fake news pops up in the conversation, or even pushing back on these conspiracy theories, QAnon, those types of things?
Yeah, that is a really hard question because remember, people are getting their information from their favorite sources, and they tend not to, they tend to like their dessert. They don't eat their vegetables very well. And so, and that goes with both sides of the equation. This side is that I have found in my own circle folks who were not in agreement with my politics, certainly, and I've been reasonable and patient as much as I can be, and I don't think it. I don't think you can force feed people things. I think they have to come to it. And unfortunately, and that's the reason why I thought this series of hearings by the January 6th committee was so inspired, because it wasn't a daily grind of Watergate. It is, they brought programs together. They let it unfold. People told their personal stories. I believe they were credible. I don't think I don't go back and listen and hear anything that I didn't think was heartfelt and candid in many respects, and really tragic in some, listening to those officers talk. So I think there's that, but you have to be willing to listen. If all you want to be is outraged, and if all you want to be is a victim of something, then you're going to feel that way. But I'm hopeful that as time goes on, a reasoned voice will prevail.
Well, and I'm hopeful too, people will use those as a cautionary tale for the future, right? We cannot let that ever happen again if we truly want to uphold our democracy. And it's just a bridge too far. And we have to maintain a sense of civility when it comes to our politics. And I just think under the Trump administration specifically, that was lost. And the respect that we were talking about that used to happen in Nevada politics, I've even seen that go away in some respects. And so how do we get back to that? And how do we figure that out and find that again? And I think that's a question I think we all should be asking ourselves.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think the other part of it is to, you see this a lot, unfortunately, in local government. I saw it a lot at the city council level. You see people who aren't really serious. They're not really serious. They're more play acting as policymakers, and that's unfortunate. And that can happen. Enough money, and you can get you can get a ventriloquist dummy elected in some cases, and so you have that. And I think we need to move past that. I think it's far past time for people who might be elected to what they consider a part-time elected job. It's long past time for them to consider themselves part-time employees, because it's time to be studied, to be up on policy, and to have sober thoughts and not be I'm just thinking of comments that others have made that are so outrageous and so hurtful to people in the different communities of color. Those things have happened, and there's no excuse for that. There's no excuse for it. But unfortunately, it still occurs, and it needs to be called out when it occurs. It needs to be called out.
Well, that's what we're here for. Happy to do it.
Absolutely.
We'll do two other questions. Beverly asks, how do we as progressives protect ourselves against the rise of all these armed militia groups in particular?
Yeah, that's a challenge, because, if you don't want to go to the street and match, helmets and batons with people who like that kind of behavior. On the other side, you also have to make your voices heard in other ways. And so, I think that protest element is important. I think, targeted protest is really important. And also, you can get out with community outreach. I think it goes a long way. It's like so many folks who've run for office, in my experience covering them, they did a lot with shoe leather door to door. They found converts sometimes difficult and sometimes got doors slammed in their faces, but they made inroads in the community just by being grassroots. And true grassroots means getting out there and liking people, even if they disagree with you. And that's hard, because, we live in a kind of a world now that's kind of a bubble of social media and all of that. So it's hard to break through that and get back out in the world.
Yeah. And then the last question I have for you from Lisa, and Lisa specifically actually works with us on countering disinformation. I know you see this a lot in your journalism as well, but is there anything the government can do, or anyone else really, to crack down on disinformation that now leads to this extremism that we're seeing?
Yeah, that's a really important question. And I'm not sure that the First Amendment can be, fine-tuned to eliminate it. With that said, I think that what can happen is you can have that classic kind of rapid reaction team to shoot down those kinds of things. And I think as time goes on and technology changes, I think that's going to happen more and more. We're seeing it more and more. It's good to see major organizations doing it, but I think those major organizations benefit from organizations on the ground who are finding these lies as they're being spilled and are willing to pass along that information up the line to people who have credibility, who can bring that to the public, saying, what you're hearing is not true, and here's why it's not true, and shooting it down. And I'm afraid that's probably the best that can be done without some kind of major revision to what we all hold dear, which is a pretty freewheeling give and take in the public.
So freewheeling, we may or may not have just made a graphic as Adam Laxalt as a handmaid. So that will be on Twitter later because you inspired a great idea.
Well, feel free to surround him with beer can commandos if you want.
You got it. We're on it. Well, John, I want to say thank you. Anything else you want to, leave with the audience? Anything else you want to lift up on this critically important topic tonight?
This is one of those times. And it's always this time, but this is especially one of those times to pay attention. We pay attention, listen closely to the folks who influence you, and listen to those that you disagree with. Because when you talk about how do we break through, we're going to break through with other people who don't agree with us by listening and by having your own views, but by being a more civil society. And it's, I sound like Mr. Rogers here, but I mean, it's really important to focus on that because, and again, it's a game of inches. Society is a game of inches, and the folks on the left are great, but I come to this conclusion. I think they all expect that if they do the right thing, it's all going to work out. But you have to do the right thing, and you have to keep doing it. You have to keep working hard because the other side's working hard too. The folks who like more guns, that no matter who they kill, who sell those guns, who influence Congress, they don't sleep. And if you want to fight back, you got to lose a little sleep yourself. And I know you do.
We're trying. We're doing the best we can. I promise.
That's all you can do.
That's right. Well, I want to thank you, John, for your expertise and always being willing to share that with us and our audience. Thank you so much for everything you do. And for those of you watching at home, please make sure you get his book. The link is in the chat. We want to make sure that you are reading good literature, especially on your summer breaks. Take it with you. I'm sure it's a really light read. Right, John? Is it a light read?
Hey, it's a couple of standoffs, some murders. Hey, it could happen. It's just a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's right. NBD, total Nevada politics. Well, thank you, John, for joining us. Another reminder, we put out an extremism report this week. Our team member, Amber, worked really hard on it with our friends over at Center for American Progress. This is an updated extremism report from our one in 2016 when the Bundy standoffs had first happened. And now we've updated it since January 6th and all of the other things that we talked about tonight. So please take a look at it. We'll send it out via email this weekend as well. And I want to just say thank you. I will be back again next week on Thursday at 5 p.m. So make sure you join us and stay safe and healthy, everyone, because COVID is still a real thing. Hope to talk to you all soon. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, John. You're the best. We appreciate you.
Have a great night.
You too. Thanks for staying a little over with us.
Well, thanks for the invitation.
Of course, anytime. Bye.